Charlton Singleton, and welcome to this edition of Raising the Volume. Today we have with us fantastic Charlestonian, Mr. Arthur McFarland. And Mr. McFarland, I feel like it's kind of come full circle. When I was in 12th grade, I was a part of this group called the Botillions, and we were part of the Jack and Jill of America. It was sort of like coming of manhood, you know, for young men that were in high school at the time. And you came and spoke to us. And I know you've probably spoken to thousands of groups and things over your lifetime so far. But it was very educational and very inspirational and enlightening for us, especially that time, to see, you know, a black judge at that time, to see someone with your knowledge and held in high esteem in the city to come and talk to us. That made a big difference in a lot of us, like myself and some of the other fellas in the group, like you know, Robert Ellington and Ezekiel Chandler and Lenny Reeder, and we've all kind of tried to go out and do some things in the community, but that was a very big moment for us, and I just always wanted to tell you that.
Well, thank you, because all of the names you just called, all of you have done quite well in this community and other communities, so glad I had a chance at least to say something to you before you got to where you are now.
Well,
help you along the way.
Thank you, sir. So now, born and raised right here in Charleston.
That's correct.
What part of Charleston?
The east side. In fact, I was born maybe 6 blocks from where we are now, and in Ragsboro Project with my mother and father, and I was the 7th of 9 siblings, 9 children at least, and so the east side I call home. I lived in the east side until I finished college. So
now, growing up during that time, and this is in the I guess the heyday of the civil rights movement, I imagine there was a lot of activism that was going along in the city. Were you a part of that?
Yeah, well, you know, I grew up basically in a community on the east side that was quite mixed. My early years where we lived was a well-integrated part of Charleston. My oldest brother, who was confined to a wheelchair, sold African-American publications, Chicago Defender, Baltimore Afro-American, Pittsburgh Courier, Jet, Ebony, even a publication called Bronze Thrills. Now, as a little boy, I used to love, sorry y'all, I loved to see I waited for the Bronze Thrills to come on because they had just these beautiful black women. But these magazines and newspapers.
That's sort of like the Beauty of the Week.
Yes, but it was a full magazine of beauties.
Okay, all right.
And so those publications, living here in Charleston and in the South, those publications gave me a window into what was going on with black Americans in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And so during the 50s, one of the, I guess, events that I've lived with since the time was the death of Emmett Till and the picture of Emmett Till in Jet magazine, because my brother distributed Jet magazines. We were one of the first folk here in Charleston really to see the picture of Emmett Till in the casket. And so that's in the middle 50s. Charleston, for the most part, in terms of civil rights, got its early beginnings when I was just a baby. Just from my law practice, I know about the all-white primary and those efforts to get, to open up the Democratic Party to African Americans. But the civil rights era really hit home in the early 60s. 1963 was what I guess folk would call Charleston's long, hot summer. The effort to desegregate businesses along King Street. I did get involved with the demonstrations going on at that time, led by folk like the late James Blake and B.J.
Blake.
Glover,
Yeah.
J. Arthur Brown. And so my mother, who was an activist certainly before I was born, encouraged me to participate in the demonstrations, which I did, the sit-ins and the marches, and I got jailed a few times. And so that was really the height of civil rights activity, because once at the end of the summer of 1963, most of the businesses had conceded that integration was not a bad thing, but a good thing for the community. And so that summer, and then of course activities around that, school desegregation and those sorts of things came up also during that period. Harvey Gantt going to Clemson. So it was a period of change, I guess we might say. So I got, as a teenager, some early involvement in civil rights.
Now, I've read, and I didn't know this, as the organist at St. Patrick Catholic Church, which is your church.
Well, we're proud to have you.
Which is your church as well.
Charlton Singleton is the organist, choir director at St. Patrick.
A lot of people still don't understand that I'm the organist, and then I'm also like a trumpet player as well. But
it's all about the music.
Right. So I'm very familiar with ICS,
right?
Immaculate Conception School. But I did not know that you went to Bishop England. Speaking of desegregation.
Yeah, that's right. I started ICS in Prima, which was before you get I guess they call that pre-K.
Oh, wow. Okay,
yeah. But the nuns, ICS was staffed by a group of African-American nuns out of Baltimore, Maryland. And the order was called the Oblate Sisters of Providence. And they ran the school for 50 years. And my mother, who was AME, thought that sending us to Immaculate Conception, starting with my oldest sister in the 1940s, was really the place to get the best education that could take us forward. And so I started, as I said, in pre-K, and then up through 10th grade when several of us were asked to, if we would transfer to Bishop England, because the Catholic Church had decided to desegregate the high school in '64. And so I transferred to Bishop England for my last 2 years. Yep.
Now, leaving Bishop England, or graduating from Bishop England, and then you then go off to college.
That's right.
And you went to Notre Dame.
Exactly. And I got to tell you, I didn't know much about Notre Dame before I got there. I had been part of a group of students they were recruiting. And so I managed to travel to South Bend, which was a totally different
it's a little chilly up there.
In the world. Chilly is an understatement. I think my first winter there, we had not, here in Charleston, where I'd lived all my life, I'd seen just a tiny bit of snowfall, I think 1 year. But the first, at the end of the first semester in South Bend, they had the heaviest snowfall they had seen in 17 years. I will never forget that. I had never seen so much snow in all my life, and it's been enough to carry me from that time forward. But yes, it was the weather was a different kind of experience among, a lot of other things that changed my life.
Now, when you went to Notre Dame, what were you pursuing? What were you majoring in?
I declared my major to be in the engineering program yes, I wanted to be an engineer. I had, for those of you from the old school know about erector sets and all that, steel putting together bridges. From a kid, I was always interested in engineering. However, things changed just slightly after I encountered some issues with chemistry.
There's always that one class that'll make you switch.
And chemistry, and also just becoming more involved in what became the Black student movement while at Notre Dame. That was a distraction from the heavy calculus that you needed to focus on. And so I switched my major into just the liberal arts program, and so that's my degree is in government, which some university call politics, political science rather. Yeah, and so, but my degree is a BA in government from Notre Dame.
So coming from Charleston and being a young man, you know, and growing up with, as you say, the activism from your mom and just family in general and all of the things that are happening here in Charleston, how does that translate up to, you know, up in South Bend?
Yeah, well, you know, that experience in high school with the civil rights movement and the desegregation at Bishop England really prepared me for Notre Dame in the activism that I ultimately became involved in, because, you know, I was in a class of, there were 11 African-American students out of a class of 1,500, I think it was. Wow. At least 1,500. And so Notre Dame was just in the beginning, early stages of accepting and recruiting African-American students. So out of 7,000 students, there were 28 Black students total on the campus.
28.
So yes, and you know, Notre Dame, middle class, upper class, white university, had not had the experience in you know, creating an environment for African-American students. And so part of what some of us became engaged in was an effort to make the university more conducive to African-American students. Now that they have started along this road of bringing African-American students to the campus, then you had to look at various aspects of life on the campus. And so my second year, in the beginning of my third year, we formed the Afro-American Society, and began to address with the university issues around the status of Black students on the campus, recruitment, scholarship, you know, even the social life. So we covered the waterfront and the academics. Before I graduated, the university established a Black Studies program, and so we had Black cultural arts festivals, bringing in, you know, African-American poets and musicians to the university. So my life here in Charleston really set the stage for being able to have a life at Notre Dame, which I think helped me mature in ways that I don't think I otherwise would have. And I became the first president of our Afro-American Society. And so it's been, and I've continued somewhat of a relationship with the university. We ultimately, after I graduated, I don't know, 15 years or so later, they established the Black Alumni of Notre Dame. So they had enough African-American students to matriculate through the university to ultimately establish a Black Alumni Association of Notre Dame.
So, okay, so you're at Notre Dame. You are starting to get them to understand a lot of the activisms and things. When you leave Notre Dame, do you immediately go into law school?
Yes, I made the decision, as I do with a number of things, very late, that maybe law school was an option. The Vietnam War was in full force when I graduated, and not only had there been activism among African American students across America at universities, but there was also the anti-Vietnam War movement. So there was a lot of turmoil on college campuses. And so, going to the military because of the draft was something that some of us didn't want to do, but I got a deferment because when I was at Bishop England, I tore a ligament in my knee. I played basketball.
Yes,
Yep, and that's one of the things that also helped, because when I was at Bishop England, I was the first African American in the state to play on a previously all-white team. So I was in a situation where I was going to other schools and basketball games and having to face crowds that certainly did not think I should be there, but also were quite hostile in some places. So, but I tore a ligament at the beginning of the season, and I played with it, and that has come to haunt me for the rest of my life. And so that was the basis that I received the deferment, because I still had issues with my knee, they said, and they examined me and decided that I was not fit for military service. So that left me, I had already applied to law school, and I went immediately to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and, continued some of my activism there with the Black American Law Students Association chapter at UVA. And it was another situation where I was among a very small group of African Americans and a majority white setting. And so that, again, things were just beginning to change at UVA. It had gone co-ed the year I got there in terms of its undergraduate school, and there were very few African Americans in the law school. So the same sort of efforts that went on at Notre Dame, continued at University of Virginia.
So now, when I first became aware of who you were, I immediately just knew the name Judge McFarland. How long were you practicing before you became the chief judge of the municipal?
I had been back home about a year and a half. I came back home in the summer of '74 after a fellowship year with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and in New York, and then I moved back home in '74, and it was in December of '75 that I was asked by Mayor Riley to, if I would become the associate judge of the Charleston Municipal Court. So I've been practicing, really. I opened my law office in January of '75, and I was a judge by January of 1976.
That's a whole nother level of fast track.
Yeah, that's right. And it wasn't something that I pursued. I mean, I had no ambition to become a judge. I did want to become an engineer, but becoming a judge, even after being a lawyer, was not something that I'd set out in my plans. And so, but they asked. I consulted with my mother and father, and my mother, because my father had died my father died 2 weeks after I moved back home. And so I consulted with my mother, who's my supporter, promoter, counselor.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And she said, give it a try. If you don't like it, you can always quit. And so I accepted, and almost 34 years later, I got to quit.
Almost 34 years later, I got to quit. I have to remember that line. So when you moved back, how was the climate of the city from when you were, I guess, say, in high school and gone to, Notre Dame and UVA and all of that, and then coming back home, was it a lot of difference from when you had left?
Sure. I think Charleston was in the midst of political change, not so much economic, but political change. When I left home, I had made a commitment to come back. In fact, when my wife Elise and I met she was in grad school at UVA, and she, asked me what I wanted to do. I said, well, I'm going back to Charleston to practice law. She says, you got to be kidding me. Everybody else in the school is trying to get to some big law firm. They want to go to New York, Washington, et cetera. I said, no, I am going back to Charleston. So that's a commitment I made before I left. When I came back, it was right at the beginnings of the change in the political atmosphere, because you had African Americans in the state legislature, Senate, and House. And then there was a single-member district ruling that changed the makeup of Charleston City Council. So in 1975, that council was put in place where you had an equal number of African American council members and white council members. And so, and Joe Riley having taken the helm of the city, there was a progressive movement. Right. And so that was a significant change from when I left. We had African Americans were returning and could be more than preachers or teachers, which had been the case for the most part. There were always African American doctors and lawyers here, but for most of us, being a teacher was one of the highest forms of professional life in the community. I have to tell you one thing very quickly, because when I was a young boy, I had a godmother who lived in Gadsden Green Homes, and I would go visit her, I don't know, weekly at least, but sometimes more often. And every time she would see me, her first question would be, Arthur, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say in response, every time without fail, I want to be a dump truck driver. She said, oh no, Arthur, you don't want to be a dump truck driver. I said, yes, and I didn't explain to her that while walking from Ragboro Homes to where she was, I'd pass these trucks. You know how everybody's into SUVs now, right, and they sit high. Well, that's what I thought, driving one of these trucks was you were top of the world. And so, but she would always respond, no, you do not want to be a dump truck driver. You want to be a principal, okay? And my godmother, had very little education, but she understood that in her world, the highest level that a black man could achieve is to become principal of a school. Yeah. So you could become a teacher. She never said you want to be a teacher. She always said you want to be a principal. And so, that was what I saw when I came back here. There were black principals in some of the mixed schools here in District 20 where I live. But there were also the political changes that had occurred really after I got back here, because that single-member district change occurred the year I opened my practice. There were more young professionals, there were African-American doctors moving into the area, so I was able to fulfill my commitment in activism by making sure that I had an African-American doctor, which I could have. And so there were a number of things and opportunities that I thought were open to me. The city hired set the example by hiring some department heads, and then Chief Reuben Greenberg came probably 6-7 years later. And so there were, and Jim Etheridge was head of the administrative part of the city. So you had African Americans in positions that wouldn't have even been thought of when I left in '66. And so I saw the change and wanted to be a part of that, and hopefully, having come back would encourage others to understand that you can come back home,
Right.
and you can make a difference if you come back home.
Now, fast forward through those years, those 34 years before you quit. I like that line, man. I love that line. You retired from that position, and you have your practice still, or you're practicing law still.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the municipal court was a part-time position. By pay, it was for me full-time in effect, because I was not only just a judge on the court, but 2 years after I was appointed associate judge, I became chief judge.
Yeah.
So almost 32 years of those 34 years, I was chief judge,
Right.
which meant I had responsibility for most of, not all of those years, but for most of those years, hiring, firing, writing administrative rules and regulations for the court, writing budgets and all of that. So it was a different kind of experience than what I had anticipated. But but I was also running a law practice. And I practiced with Elaine Jenkins, Esau Jenkins' daughter, for a while, and then Tony O'Neill. And so I was still, quite busy.
That's an
to say the
understatement.
least. To say the least. I look back and I wonder how I survived it all, but thank God I did. And it was because of God that I know that I survived that period.
So now, with everything that has been going on in the world today, specifically in the United States, recently, racially, I know that you are a part of a group here in Charleston, the Charleston Area Justice Ministry.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Charleston Area Justice Ministry is an 8-year-old organization started by some well-known clergy here, Reverend Rivers, Nelson Rivers, Reverend Joseph Darby, the rabbi from the Beth Elohim church congregation, rather, in 2012. And the purpose and mission of CAJM is to address inequalities in the community by holding public officials accountable for addressing serious problems in our community. And so the CAJM is today made up of some 35 congregations, including the, as I mentioned, the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and certainly the Christian community, with some 800-900 network members. And what CAJM does on an annual basis is to have each of our congregations and team leaders host house meetings. So for instance, this past month, September, and this month, there have been over 110, 120 house meetings where members of the congregation and folk outside of the congregation are invited to sit and talk about what troubles them, both in their personal lives as well as, community problems they identified. And over the years, those community problems have included educational disparities, suspensions, expulsions, particularly of African American students. 1 year there was an issue regarding increasing the number of pre-K slots in Charleston County. So over the last 6 years or so, almost 1,800 students have been able to attend pre-K classes because of CAJM's push of the Charleston County School District to increase by 300 slots each year the pre-K slots. We have dealt with racial bias in the Charleston City Police Department, having gotten the city to pay for and complete the racial bias audit, and of course that is now being implemented. And then just last week, the city of North Charleston, after some effort, passed a motion to conduct a racial bias audit, but they went one step further than Charleston, and they hired a firm not only to conduct the audit, but to help them with implementation. And so we've had wage theft as an issue. And so from these House meetings, if I can go back to that, we take the 3 top community problems that were identified, and then later this month we will have what we call the Community Problems Assembly, which is our annual meeting of CAJM, and we bring together some 800-900 network members, and as a part of that meeting, we will vote on an issue to take up during this next cycle. And that cycle basically involves, once you select an issue, you then conduct the research on, how does that problem play out in the community, what solutions there might be. And that research involves talking to experts and other persons really around the country who've dealt with the problem and who've had experience in developing solutions. And then we work for about 3 months on figuring out a solution to the problem as we see it here in our community. And then we present the issue and the solution to public officials, and ask those public officials to adopt the solution that the community has come up with. And so, for instance, on the police audit, it took a couple of years to convince the city of Charleston that there was a problem, and one of the best ways and one of the accepted ways of addressing it would be to conduct a racial bias audit, because there is implicit bias in policing. I mean, that's well known. That's been the history in Charleston, being one of the early cities where policing got its start, is well familiar with, the issues that have arisen over time. And so we ultimately were able to convince Mayor Tecklenburg and city council members, and they unanimously passed this audit, had it done. And hopefully over the next few years, we will see significant changes, particularly in the lives of African Americans. I'll give you just a statistic that helps you understand why that issue was so prominent. I think for a 5-year period, from 2013 maybe to 2018, there had been recorded some 125,000 traffic stops in Charleston alone. Now, there was another 127,000 or so in North Charleston, where the citizens who were stopped were not given a citation or arrested. They had just been stopped for what we considered pretext stops. That is, I'm gonna stop you, Charlton, to maybe you might have an arrest warrant out for you, or maybe you might have drugs in your car or a weapon, but let's take this chance. And then when nothing was found, or there was no reason to give a citation, the purpose of the stop was never made known, but they might have been given a warning ticket. And so you're talking about the lives of, and the disproportionate number of those stops were African American. Okay?
That's actually happened to me.
There you go. It's hard to talk to an African American in Charleston who has a driver's license, or may not have had a driver's license, may have been a passenger in a car, who has not had that experience or known someone who has had that experience. And it was just amazing in these House meetings, because discrimination in policing had come up several years before we finally took up that issue. And so all of us knew and appreciated the fact that something needed to be done, but we had to convince public officials that this was a problem for a significant portion of the community and something needed to be done.
Right.
And we were successful. So that's been true. Every year, CAJM has raised a problem, raised an issue, and has been successful. So I just got to tell you, as a lawyer, I handle cases, and if I represented you, yeah, we go to court, and you come out of court happy because things went well. Well, that was only, that you were the one person I helped. But with CAJM, I found that, with what we do, I'm able to help thousands of people with just one group action. And it's because of and it's not because of me, but it's because of the power of people that come together and community and officials. We can be in Gilliard. I mean, this is what, 1,800? So this year we're looking for 2,000 folk to come to our Nehemiah action next March. So every year, if I can continue that, I'll get to the end. Every year we have a Nehemiah action where we bring public officials to the arena. And the last few years has been Mount Moriah Baptist Church. They hold 20-some hundred folk. And we present the problem and the solution to the public official and ask them to agree to work on the solution. And so here you have, like you and I are sitting here, looking out at a couple of thousand folk and who are saying, look, we need you to address this issue. Will you do so? And so that is how we have been successful, not because of those who run CAJM, but because of the thousands of people who've come out over the years to say to public officials, you've got to address this problem because it's important to us.
And for those folks that are watching this, they can go to a website?
Yes, their Charleston Area Justice Ministry has a website, and you can get information. We're looking for new congregations all the time. And if you are interested, you can find me, or we have an office at the United Methodist Church right there at the corner of Cosgrove and Rivers Avenue. And we're not staffed we're not there now because of the pandemic, but certainly you can get to us online, you can call. We are looking for more in the community to engage with us, because the more people who are engaged, I think the more success we will have in making Charleston a much more equitable and inclusive community. And so that's the objective of CAJM. And fortunately, in coming back home, going back to your earlier question, I've just never seen anything like it, because it is not only religiously mixed, but it's racially mixed. It's, gender. And of course, we have all of the age ranges that give us the ability to address a wide variety of issues and get input from across generations. And so it's for me, if anything, in this bookend of life here, coming back home, I think CAJM has really been the high point. I consider my years on the municipal court certainly an individual achievement, but in terms of the change in this community, I think CAJM has certainly been up there with my years on the bench.
Well, we're certainly glad that you chose to come back home and continue a lot of the work and inspire folks like myself and other young folks that look up to you and other, I call them hierarchy in the community, especially in the Black community. We appreciate you for your dedication to all of the work that you've been doing.
Well, what gives me joy is seeing folk like yourself who've come back after me and whose contributions just take this community to another level. I mean, what you have done in the world of music, and I gotta say not only jazz, because you play for us every Sunday, but you have allowed us in the Catholic Church to experience African American culture in a very Eurocentric setting. And for that, we at our church, I think folk in this diocese are very grateful, because people who experience your music in the service, in the Mass every Sunday, and now they can stream so they can hear you without having to come to the church. I mean, appreciate, and really for me as an African American man, to be able to have to experience my culture in the context of my religious involvement has made for one of those experiences that I consider just so relevant to my being. And so I thank you for that. I know Charleston thanks you, because everybody just, loves you. And so you have done for us where you are. Because one of the things I always say is that, in order to break down some of these racial barriers that we've had to confront, you need to start with where you are. So I might start in the law, but you start in music, and that makes a tremendous difference and is made for, who we are here in Charleston. So Charleston community is built because of people like you. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. And once again, I really appreciate you coming on and doing this new series with us, and Charleston appreciates you as well for all of your work. Thank you, sir.
Well, I'm grateful for the invitation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in. Once again, my name is Charlton Singleton. We've been talking with Arthur McFarland, and we'll see you soon.